The nation is on tenterhooks as government negotiators and public sector trade unions sit around the table, possibly for the last time. After today, a strike notice can be declared, which means that public sector workers, including teachers and nurses, could embark on a strike. But sources close to the talks are saying that the parties have reached an in-principle agreement, which is likely to be finalised tonight. The marathon wage negotiations have been going on for 7 months, with the government refusing to budge on its initial offer of 5.8%. But now sources say government negotiators finally agreed to increase the offer yesterday. The unions also agreed to further lower their wage demand from 10% in order to meet the state. The exact meeting point is a closely guarded secret. Government negotiators left last night's meeting to go and consult with their principals, especially the National Treasury, about the in-principle agreement. They were due to report back today and hopefully conclude that agreement. If indeed the deal is clinched tonight, details will be announced at May Day rallies to be held countrywide tomorrow. Well, to discuss, we're joined by Vic Van Vuuren, who's the International Labour Organisation's Director in South Africa. He joins us from our studio in Pretoria. Good evening to you, Vic. The strike potentially massive if it does go ahead. Just remind us who these workers are and what's involved here.
Well, we're talking about the civil service at the moment, and it's going to be, with the numbers we're talking about, obviously a huge crippling strike for the South African economy. And at this stage of the game, and having gone through these strikes in the last few years, we need to avoid it at all costs. If an agreement is not reached, do you actually believe there are other measures, even beyond tonight, that can be taken to avoid a strike? Just explain what could possibly happen. I think it's inevitable that we need to follow a different path rather than a strike path. You know, in industrial relations, we need to be creative, and there are many opportunities of mediation, of arbitration, and I would believe that they've given this some thought, that if there's no deal, that they should contemplate following one of these paths. I think in the interests of workers and the country at large, it's necessary that if they don't get a deal this evening, that they follow one of these paths rather than embarking on a strike. We can't afford it from a worker and a government point of view, and so we need to just get through this.
Vic, put this all in context, please, because apparently public sector workers have received a 90% wage increase since 2009. So we're looking at an average of 15% a year. It sounds like really big jumps, but then we still hear of teachers, of nurses who cannot afford to feed their families. What do you think of the actual level that we're on right now?
I think it most probably would be higher than the norm, but what one's got to consider is that within the government services you've got very high skills that are needed, and so I think the answer for the future is that we've got to redesign our collective bargaining system so that where you've got critical skills, that you don't put them together with skills that are not so critical, and then you can start differentiating in the size of what you're giving the critical skills versus perhaps an inflation targeted increase for other workers. And at the moment it's everybody in the same pot, and that doesn't work well for the future.
I would say education is a critical skill, for example, and we know that government has put forward ideas around performance-based measures, but it has been an uphill battle, unions not liking that. Is that the way we should go, performance-based rewards?
That's one way to go, and I think performance-based, but if you're doing performance-based, you might have to do that for all the staff members and not just only teachers. What I would like to see is that we redesign our collective bargaining system so that you've got critical skills perhaps in a different pool of bargaining, and that you can differentiate even on the percentage that you give to the more critical skills. Education is clearly an Achilles heel for us, and we cannot afford to lose teachers that go for more competitive salaries into the private sector and non-teaching jobs. And that's what's been happening over the years. We're eroding a very critical base.
Okay, so there will be one salary increase for everybody. This does seem quite different to private sector negotiations because government basically has to play its hand. It budgets for these increases in the national budget in February, so it's known well in advance. It budgeted 6%. Does that weaken it or put it in a position of strength? It must be frustrating for workers' unions who believe that there's now a ceiling of 6%.
must remember that 6% is not really covering only just a wage increase of 6%. You must probably talking of a 6% on your wage bill, which would include also housing allowances or other kinds of allowances. And so you've got to add that all up and then come up to a total of 6% as a guideline. And once again, a budget is usually a guideline, and government will have to look at how they deal with that. And it's obviously a sign to the labour unions as to what government's got in mind as an increase. But you need to take these other allowances into account and add it into the 6%. That means that your wage increase is sometimes lower, or the offer is lower than the 6% budgeted.
Okay, well, government has been staying at 5.8% for a while, presumably so it can just then push up maybe to 6%. If government effectively blows the budget and goes quite significantly beyond 6%, this, we've got to remember, is the biggest ticket item on the budget. What are the implications of that?
Well, the implications are that you're going to have to find the money elsewhere, and that means either through increased taxes or savings elsewhere. And it certainly has a negative impact on the economy as a whole. And so, you know, the figures you're talking about are huge. So when you're talking of even a 1% increase, it sounds very small, but it's a huge amount on the government's budget. So the impact is going to be felt elsewhere. And I think we must be careful of trying to resolve an issue very quickly and easily. Short-term gain can often lead to long-term pain. And you might find that you'll have to reduce your workforce as another means of trying to meet your budget. So there's many different areas that one will have to go and look to find that extra money if there's a higher settlement.
All right, thank you very much. That was Vic Van Vuuren from the International Labour Organization, the director in South Africa.